Well, let's get to our first guest of the year and talk about what's in store for the year ahead, plus 3 key things to watch when setting up a trade. My guest today is Peter McGuire from XM, joining me live via Skype from Sydney. Peter, great to go and see you there. Hope you had a fantastic turn over the new year. Look, let's go and talk about the year ahead. Look, big volatility pickup in the second half of 2021. Is that set to continue into 2022?
Good to see you, David. Happy New Year. I think it will continue. I tell you what, who could have expected what we saw yesterday as far as those numbers coming out of India? Strong move as far as equities. Have a look what we are today, up nearly 1.75%. So it's very, very strong. Big push up overnight on New York. So all of those factors coming into play, I think, represent a lot of opportunity, and also demonstrating to the retail traders across the world that this isn't the time to be away from the market. There's plenty of money to be made at the moment, and those opportunities are presenting themselves by the hour.
Absolutely. Any particular market that you're watching closely this year as the best opportunities out there? Or no, what are some of the ones on the radar?
Well, David, you've got to look at US dollar first off. You've certainly got it for all your currency trades. Secondly, how much further? We're up 27%, I think, for the S&P last year. So will that continue in 22? So that's not a bad move, and there was really very minimal drawdowns. I'm keeping an eye as far as the inflation story, so that takes me to crude oil. Crude oil, David, is just dramatic when you're thinking about the volatility, big swings. So that's a trader's delight. That really is, that's a paradise trade. You've only got to get, the right side of it, look at your fundamentals, look at the technicals following that, and then the seasonality play as far as demand picture. Seasonality we refer to, David, pretty much like public holidays, seasonal events, Christmas, New Year, Lunar New Year in China, and so on.
Let's talk about, regardless of which market or which individual stock that you want to go and trade, let's go and talk about the actual trade setup, the process that you go through, Peter, when you go and evaluate whether trade on its merits. Can we start from the fundamental perspective? How do you go and screen using that lens?
Well, I think, David, it's got to first start off, are you trading an equity like an Australian equity that's open for 6 hours a day, or are you trading a commodity market or a currency that's open 24 hours a day? So there's that really paints the first part of the picture. So if you're trading, let's say, a currency that's trading on a 24-hour-a-day window over 5 days, so it doesn't stop, then you've got to look at the big inputs. What's happening as far as data releases, PMIs? You've got to do your research on as far as ISM manufacturing. We've got some coming out tonight, so in the States. So there's the first point. You've got to look at inflation. What's the drop? What's going on as far as those big numbers coming from somewhere like the Fed or one of the central banks, being the Australian or naturally the ECB. So there's the first part. Look at the fundamentals and seeing what's going to drop over the next few days.
What about from a technical perspective? Because a lot of people like to go and take that out of the equation or the fundamental side of it and just focus on what the price action says. How important is that when it comes to evaluating a trade?
Well, very important, because that's the second part of it. As far as where do the graphs show me? Is it overbought, undersold, oversold? What are the RSIs doing? What's the Bollinger Bands doing? You've got, maybe you've identified 4 or 5 key technical indicators that you use. What I use and what someone else uses it could be completely different, and we get the same result, or someone beats me by a country mile. It just depends on what indicators I'm looking. And remember, there's probably 100 or more, David. So there's the first side. So which technical indicators are you using, and how does the trade look? Where are the moving averages? Where is it sitting at the moment? Is it under that moving average? Is it over it? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to short a market, or I'm trying to go long in a market? There's the other side of it. Which way am I trading, up or down?
What about the modelling side of the equation? Taking that to know the technical picture, is there any modelling that you go and do when it comes to evaluating traders, or is it just based off that fundamental lens then into a technical lens?
Well, it's got to be, you've got to look at the modelling, and you've got to look at, many traders use algorithms to trade. So they're looking at, if you're referring to that side of it, the mathematical formulas associated. That's the big hedge funds. That's what these expert advisors use. Those indicators are naturally condensing a lot of those key frameworks together, and then identifying an opportunity to either enter or exit a market in a directional trade. So that's the core essence of what that represents. So depends on your firepower, depends on what you're doing and who you're doing it with. as far as how you identify a trade, but more importantly, how big your firepower is and what analysis tools you use.
Pete, you've mentioned the crude market. You've mentioned the scale of the increase that we're seeing in some of the equity markets around the world in the early January. Of course, it's the Santa Claus rally that we talk about. That's a seasonal pattern that a lot of people go and look for as well. Seasonality trends, is that something that's probably neglected a little bit when it comes to the trading environment?
Well, David, if you're looking at let's look at a commodity trader. Commodity traders only look at seasonality to start with. When am I planting the crop? When am I going to get the crop out of the ground? What's the weather doing at the moment? Is the ground too wet? Is it too dry? Is it frosted? What's happening as far as from a planting side of it? So that's got to be all determined if you're looking at trading, say, grains. So it could be wheat, or you could be looking at orange juice, or looking at any of the other particular crops that grow. So there's that side of it. So seasonality plays a large part as far as setting up the trade and then realising what the opportunities are over that life phase of that planting season.
So I've gone through the fundamentals, the technicals, and the seasonal patterns that you need to go and keep an eye on. Pete, just to go and finish off, is there any other advice you could give to someone who is starting out in their trading journey in early 2022? What are some of the things that you should know about as an investor?
I think you've got to look at education, David. That's a big, very, very important part. Many of the big platforms players, they have extensive education processes in place daily. We run about 27 hours a day of live TV, so that gives you an idea of the depth of our global market with many millions of traders. So there's the first part. You've got to look at that technical analysis and look at what the platforms offer to teach you. Then the next part of it, of course, is what time of the day are you going to trade? Are you trading? We live in Sydney. Am I going to trade Sydney time zone, or am I going to trade India time zone leading into Middle East and then early part of the breakfast period into Europe? Or am I going to trade US markets? That time zone. So I've got to get myself right in that mindset. What am I doing? If I've got a full-time job, it's pretty hard to have a trade all night and then try and be productive in the daytime, David.